Ahoy! Regardless of whether you're young, old, or somewhere in the middle, I think every gamer has that one game. You know the one that started it all. The game that sucked you into some strange, uncharted world and made you think, holy crap, video games are awesome. Maybe it was the colorful characters, maybe it was the story, or the gameplay, or maybe you were just like me and had absolutely no idea what you were doing. But you were having the time of your life. Because that's the funny thing about video games. Behind all that magic, all of those beautiful worlds and memorable characters, it's ultimately just a bunch of ones and zeros. And somehow, all those ones and zeros can become something that sticks with you for decades. For me, we're going to have the dust of an old friend and travel all the way back to the early 90s. My very first gaming console, the legendary Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES for short. And the very first game I played on that beautiful piece of plastic, Super Mario World. And little did I know at the time, but that game would be the first step in what would become my lifelong addiction to video games. So what was it about the Super Mario World that sucked me in so much? Well, by today's standards, it might seem a little ridiculous that a 2D platformer could awaken such a sense of wonder in a little kid. But back then, it was magic, and I absolutely loved it. You had these colorful worlds filled with enemies, obstacles, secrets, power-ups, and enough random nonsense to keep a kid entertained for hours. And then there was the music and the sound effects and Yoshi. Oh my god, I loved Yoshi. But more than anything, I think it was the feeling of simply going somewhere. You started a level, you had an idea of what was waiting for you. So you just went, you ran, you jumped, you got hit by something stupid, you fell into a hole, you probably yelled at the television, and then you tried again. And again, and again, because when you're a kid playing your first video game, something as simple as walking from left to right can apparently be a monumental challenge. You have to learn the controls, you have to learn what enemies do, you have to figure out that maybe jumping directly into a Goomba isn't the best strategy. And then there's the realization that your lives are finite, which is a pretty horrifying concept when you're just a little kid. So much of my early experiences with Super Mario World was just trial and error. I'd fail, I'd try again, I'd get a little further, I'd fail in a completely different and probably more embarrassing way, and then eventually I'd beat the level. And that feeling was incredible, because even though I was just a little kid playing Super Mario, I could actually feel myself getting better. The game wasn't just entertaining me, it was teaching me. Every obstacle I overcame was something I had previously struggled with, and every new world felt like progress. Every new power-up felt exciting, and every time I reached that goal at the end of the stage, there was this tiny little feeling of accomplishment. And I think that's one of the reasons Super Mario World stuck with me so much. It wasn't necessarily because it was some technological masterpiece, it wasn't because it had a complicated story, it wasn't because I understood what game design was. I was a kid. It was simply a game that made me want to keep playing. And that one game opened up the floodgates, because once I had Super Mario World, I wanted more. It pulled me deeper into the world of Nintendo and introduced me to games like The Legend of Zelda, Donkey Kong, and countless others. But more importantly, it made me fall completely in love with the platformer genre. And over the years, I've played a lot of them. Rayman, Crash Bandicoot, Super Meat Boy, Ori, and plenty of others. Some were fantastic, some were frustrating, some made me question whether I actually enjoyed video games or simply enjoyed suffering. But they all had that same fundamental appeal. You have a level, you have a challenge, you overcome it, and you move forward. There is something incredibly satisfying about that. Now, on the flip side, I've never really had that same relationship with games like Pac-Man, Tetris, and other games in that general ballpark. And I'm not saying they're bad games, obviously not. They're iconic for a reason, but I've never really been particularly drawn to that high-score driven style of game. I've always wanted something with a destination. I wanted to feel like I was going somewhere. I wanted an adventure. I wanted a beginning. I wanted an ending. I wanted to eventually look at the screen and go, holy shit, I actually beat it. An end game, if you will. I have dabbled in the arcade genre over the years, and I can certainly appreciate it, but for me, that's always been more of a curiosity than something I could genuinely fall in love with. And that brings us to the interesting part, because if you ask me how I feel about platformers today, well, my love for the genre is still very much alive, but at the same time, I don't think technological advancement has necessarily made platformers better for me. We've gone from 2D to 3D. We've gone from little tiny sprites to enormous worlds. We've gone from Mario running across a flat screen to Mario being able to run in practically every direction imaginable. And obviously that's incredible. The evolution of the genre is fascinating, but here's where I divert, because despite all of that, I still prefer the old 2D Mario games. Yep, I'm one of those people. Hold on, let me explain. I've got nothing against the 3D Mario games. I genuinely do enjoy them. I completely understand why people adore games like Super Mario Galaxy or Super Mario Odyssey. They're incredibly creative, they're mechanically impressive, they're full of ideas, and there's absolutely an argument to be made that they're better games. But they don't give me that same feeling. And I think that's because Super Mario World isn't just a game to me anymore, it's a memory. It's a snapshot of time when everything was new. A time when picking up a controller could feel like discovering an entirely different universe. And that's something you can't really recreate with better graphics. You can give me ray tracing, 8K textures, you can give Mario enough polygons to make NASA jealous, but sometimes I just want to run from left to right, jump on a Goomba, grab a mushroom, and eventually cross that finish line. Because there's just something about that gameplay loop that I adore. Run, jump, avoid the enemy, find a secret, grab a power-up, reach the goal, that's it. And yet somehow it works. When I hear the word platformer, I immediately think retro. I think side-scroller, I think colorful worlds, I think simple controls. You spend the entire level overcoming obstacles. You make mistakes, you get frustrated, you figure things out, and eventually you reach the end. The music plays, the level is over. And for a brief moment, you get to think, I did it. And maybe that's why I've never really been able to completely let go of that old school style of platformer, because when I play Super Mario World today, I'm not just playing Super Mario World, I'm revisiting a part of myself. I'm going back to that little kid sitting in front of an SNES, staring at the television and slowly figuring out how this weird little hobby called gaming actually works. And I think that's something we sometimes forget when we talk about old games. Not every game becomes someone's favorite because it's objectively the best game ever made. Sometimes it's because of when you played it, sometimes it's because of who you were when you played it, and sometimes it's simply because it was the game that was there when you fell in love with gaming. That's what Super Mario World is for me. I played plenty of platformers since then, some of them I've absolutely adored, and I'm sure I will play plenty more in the future. But I genuinely don't think another platformer will ever replace Super Mario World for me, because like I said, at this point it's not just a game, it's part of my gaming DNA. It's a game that started everything, and whether or not you agree with me, well, that's entirely up to you. I'm not here to change anybody's mind, I'm just here to ramble about video games on the internet, which, let's be honest, is probably the healthiest possible use of my time. But who knows, maybe someday another game will come along and completely blow me away. Maybe there'll be a new platformer that manages to capture that same feeling, something that breaks the mold, something that makes me feel like a kid again. And if that day ever comes, I'll happily give Super Mario World a little pat on the back and say, don't worry buddy, you've got competition. But until then, I will die on this hill. Super Mario World is the game that started everything for me, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So with that being said, that brings us to the end of my personal little ramble. But now I want to hear from you. What was the game that made you realize, oh crap, I think I'm a gamer now? Maybe it was Mario, maybe it was Zelda or Pokemon, maybe it was some completely obscure game that nobody else remembers. Whatever it was, tell me about it down in the comments. I would genuinely love to hear what game started your journey. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. I talk about anime, manga, and video games several times a week. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, you know what to do. I am Frogheim, and I'll see you next time.